So Augustus marks the start of the Roman Empire.
Yep.
You've written that Octavian Augustus would become Rome's first emperor, and the political system that he created would endure for the next half a millennium. This system would become the template for countless later empires up through the present day, and he would become the model emperor against whom all subsequent ones would be measured. The culture and history of the Mediterranean basin, the Western world, and even global history itself were all profoundly shaped and influenced by the actions and legacy of Octavian. He was the founder of the Roman Empire, and we still live today in the world that he created. So, what on the political side of things, and maybe beyond, what is the political system that he created?
Well, I think Octavian / Augustus, it's the same guy, is one of the most influential people in history because he did found the Roman Empire. So he's the one who oversaw this transition from republic to empire, and he sets the template which every future emperor follows. Mm-hmm. So just in the most obvious way, for the next either 500 or 1500 years, depending how long you think the Roman Empire lasted for, everyone is trying to be Augustus. They all take on the same titles. Every Roman emperor after him is Caesar Augustus, Imperator, Pater Patriae, all these titles he has, they take too. And so he's hugely influential for Western civilization, all this. But beyond just that literal thing, which is already 500 years, 1500 years, he becomes the paradigm of the good ruler. Mm-hmm. So of an absolute ruler who is nevertheless sort of just, does good things, builds public works, is popular. So if we jump ahead, let's say, to the Middle Ages, the most significant ruler of the early Middle Ages is Charlemagne, right? He's the guy who unites most of Europe. He becomes the paradigm for all medieval kings after him. Well, what is the title that the Pope gives to Charlemagne? Because there's this famous moment when the Pope acknowledges Charlemagne as the preeminent European king and crowns him on Christmas Day of the year 800. And the title that the Pope gives to Charlemagne is Charles, that's Charlemagne, Augustus, Emperor of the Romans. He's giving him the title of Augustus because that's the nicest thing he can think of to say to Charlemagne is to say, you're the new Augustus, you're Emperor of the Romans.
Yeah.
So that image is hugely powerful. And that persists on and on. Even the literal names of most rulers afterwards come from this. In Russia, the czars are Caesars. That's where czar comes from. Mm-hmm. Prince comes from princeps, first citizen, one of the titles. Emperor comes from imperator, one of the titles of Augustus. When Napoleon becomes emperor, what does he call himself? First consul, which is kind of like princeps. And then he calls himself emperor. Everybody wants to be this kind of ruler. So he's the paradigm of this for the rest of history. And you can see that as both a positive and a negative legacy. It's kind of like Alexander. Everybody wants to be the next Alexander. Now, nobody does become the next Alexander. Nobody's as successful as him, but a lot of people try. And you can see that either as, inspirational or awful, because lots of people killed lots of other people and started lots of wars trying to be the next Alexander. At least Augustus has this notion of good rulership, that you're not just a great, powerful person, but you're a good ruler somehow.
Can you speak to the kind of political system he created? So how did he consolidate power, as you spoke to a bit already? And what role did the Senate now play? How were the laws? Who was the executive? How was power allocated, and so on?
Yeah, so once the empire begins, let's say 27 BC, so in 31 BC, Octavian defeats Antony at the Battle of Actium. So that's kind of the moment he becomes the sole ruler. And then in 27 BC, a couple of years later, he settles the Roman Republic, is how it's referred to, which basically sets up his system. And in this system, on the surface, it all looks the same. You still have a Senate. Each year, there's elections. All the Roman citizens vote. They elect magistrates who notionally are in charge of Rome. But, as I mentioned, off to the side, you now have this figure of Augustus who sort of controls everything behind the scenes. And that continues. So this political system he establishes continues. And in reality, I would say Augustus at that point is again a king. It really is one man controlling the state, even if notionally it's still continuing as a republic. They are electing magistrates, but the magistrates only do what the emperor tells them, right? But it's this sort of formal versus informal power. The formal structure is a republic. The way things really work informally is it's a monarchy. Now, if you asked Augustus, what did he do? Did you become a king? He said, and he says this explicitly, no, no, no. What I did is I refounded the Roman Republic. That's how he phrases it.
Yeah, this guy's good at framing.
He's so good at propaganda. I'll give you one more example that I love. Augustus actually writes his own autobiography, which is very rare and survives. So here we have the autobiography of one of the pivotal figures in history. And if you had conquered the world, let's say, starting at the age of 18, what would you call your autobiography? It'd be something like, How I Conquered the World, right? Augustus calls his the Res Gestae, which the best sort of literal translation is Stuff I Did. I mean, it's the most modest title for someone who could have given the most grandiose title. And the first line of it is, at the age of 18, when the liberty of the republic was oppressed by a faction, I defended it. Now, the way I might phrase that sentence is, at the age of 18, I fought a civil war against another Roman and conquered the Roman state. But no, he defended the liberty of the republic when it was oppressed by the tyranny of a faction. That's propaganda. And it works.
It is propaganda, but is there a degree to which he also lived it? That kind of humility, establishing that humility is the standard of the way government operates. So it's not like a literal direct balance of power, but it's sort of a cultural balance of power where the emperor is not supposed to be a bully and a dictator.
I would really like to know what Romans of his time thought. Like if you were alive at that moment, would you honestly believe, oh, okay, we've got this guy Augustus, but he's brought peace. He's just kind of keeping in charge for a while till things settle down. We've just had 100 years of civil war. I think we still have a republic. Or would you say, nah, we have a king now? And I don't know what the answer to that is. I will tell you that it takes 200 years before we have the first Roman source that bluntly calls Augustus a king. Mm-hmm. So 200 years. It takes the Romans 200 years to admit to themselves. And that's a guy who comes along 200 years later and says, hey, Augustus, he looks like a king. He acts like a king. Let's just call him a king because he had every aspect of a king except the paltry title.
Maybe I'm buying his propaganda and maybe I'm a sucker for humility, but I suspect that the Romans bought it. And I also suspect he himself believed it. I mean, there is such thing as good kings, right? There's kings that understand the downside, the dark side of absolute power, and can wield that power properly.
And to give sort of both sides here, Augustus wasn't all nice. I mean, there were moments where he was extremely cruel. So early in his career, when he's still fighting, when he's for power, he goes all in on prescriptions, which is where he and Antony and other people basically post lists of their enemies and say it's legal for anyone to kill these people. Mm-hmm. And so hundreds are massacred there, including Cicero, the great orator, is prescribed and killed. There's moments when he's really cruel. One slave once gets him angry and he has him tortured in a particularly sort of cruel manner. So, I mean, on the one hand, he had this clemency. On the other hand, he could be really hard-nosed and hard-edged. And I think he was a very calculating person.
Yeah. So the thing I would love to know is what he was actually like behind the mask.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that to me is one of those, like, if you could invite a historical person to dinner or whatever, I want to know what the real Augustus was, what he really thought he was doing, because he's an enigma. And he has this great moment when he dies, right? What's his dying lines on his deathbed? He says, if I've played my part well, dismiss me from the stage with applause. So he's seeing himself as an actor. Mm-hmm. That his whole life was acting this role, which is, again, all that manipulation and public image. He was brilliant at that. But who's the real guy? What was behind that image?